Welcome to the Mental Fitness Podcast. Today's entrepreneurs are mental athletes that have to know about the mind and how to keep it fit. Our goal is to increase our resilience against stress and anxiety, optimize our productivity, motivation, and optimism by learning about the human mind through psychology, neuroscience, and human behavior. I'm your host Ozan. I'm a founder who has experienced the challenges of launching and growing a business and a keen student of human behavior over the last 15 years. I'll share with you what I know and learn. Hundreds of impactful, behavior-changing ideas are waiting to be discovered by us. Let's begin now. So what would a gym for the mind look like? We know that brain is like a muscle and the mind lives within it. Anatomically speaking, of course, this is not a perfect analogy, but nothing is when it comes to the brain. It is such a complex structure that we have to find analogies, a way to dumb it down to actually communicate important ideas that we need to without going into lectures. It spends energy like a muscle, it grows in capacity when used, it atrophies when neglected, it can build skills, remember, problem solve, and it is the key actually, as we know, to a better, healthier, happier life. And especially if you're an entrepreneur, it becomes much more important because it is the core machine that is actually you build what you build the system around. It solves problems for you, it manages relationships for you, it sees opportunities. It is the arena where that internal fight between motivation and sometimes the desire to be lazy actually takes place. So it is actually very, very important. So before we go back to the question of what would a gym for the mind look like, I think we need to take a step back and take a look at why do we have sports in the first place. Well, sports are essentially a gamification method we humans have invented to get that exercise we need. And also because it's fun. I get that as well. But you have to notice the fact that rural life has no sports or they are very limited. They are games, but the core idea is not to increase physical health. They are there for fun. But today, sports has a different place, at least mentally. It is a required activity in a way that we have to perform to remain healthy, and at the same time we want that to be fun as well. So that is the function of sports in a nutshell. So if there was a gym for the mind designed by the foremost experts in this field, what would that look like? So this is the question that I've been wrestling with for the last few weeks after I've decided to actually start this podcast. And before we go into that, I have to establish my relationship with this topic here. So I have essentially been a fan of understanding the human mind and behavior for the last 15 years. I've studied psychology, I've studied sociology, and I've written a few books on the topic. The last one being Startups Grow with People, essentially discovering the human side of building a startup. In parallel to this, for the last 5 years, I've been an entrepreneur. I've launched 4 businesses, now going on to the 5th. Created lots of projects, lots of partnerships. And I have noticed, both within me and with the people that I do work with sometimes as a startup consultant, like it comes down to managing your mental fitness. It comes down to managing that psychological reserve that you have to be successful. This is for entrepreneurs, but not only limited to them, because when I say entrepreneur, I actually use that term very broadly. At one end of the scale, there is that stereotypical startup founder, VC backed with a large team. And on the other end of that spectrum, of that scale, is the freelancer or the solopreneur. So when I say an entrepreneur, I would like to include everyone that is in between that scale. So this is all the freelancers, many of the consultants that work in tech, people who are currently white collars, but they have a desire or an interest to actually build their own startup or become an entrepreneur. And I think this is a general direction the whole world is heading. So anyways, the core idea is this is something that is very core to being an entrepreneur. In each rotation, in each new product, in each failure I had, in each success I had, and in each observation I had working with people who were either very successful in bringing their product to the market and building a business and becoming revenue positive and growing their business, and in cases that were not so positive, it all comes down to a singular topic as far as I can see that, and it is the psychological reserve and the mental fitness that the entrepreneur has. If the entrepreneur has that reserve, so that usually seems to be the bottleneck. So the core idea is, if we could train the mind, if we could train our mental world in a way to be more fit, it would be more productive, it would complement our happiness in other areas of life. So that is the core idea, and it is going to be the underlying theme of this podcast as well. So that out of the way, so going back to my thought experiment and my notes on what would actually a stereotypical gym for the mind look like, I come up with some similarities that exist between the mind and the physical body. So a stereotypical gym, we have the cardio area, the elliptical machines, the treadmills, the cycles, whatever, and then you have the free weights area, you have the weight training machines, and you have a free activity area from anything from Zumba to Pilates. So, and in terms of muscle groups, we have the cardio, so internal muscles in a way. I know that's not the exact correct terminology for that, but let's stick with that as an analogy. And then we have the core and the balance. We have the legs. We have upper body strength and arms. So a rough grouping would look like this. So in terms of the type of training, there's also variance here. You can go through either strength training or you can build endurance. Now, jumping back to the mind, the core areas of health and growth for the mind. So what are they? So I think one of them is, the foremost is learning and memory. It is important because it is it's the foundation of identity in a way. Without memory, you don't have an idea of who you are. So it is your identity, and identity is at the very core, at the very basic pillar of motivation. And this goes back to the existential roots of psychology. In a way, we are all trying to exist. We are trying to express that life drive in a way. So the stories we tell to ourselves in terms of who we think we are, they manifest themselves in incredibly strong ways. It's a way of expressing ourselves. So when something is in line with our identity, we have a huge motivation to actually accomplish that task. So this is why that's important. And then problem solving, right? Problem solving is at the very core of being an entrepreneur. It is a very complex landscape because there is technology, different jobs, interaction with people, and bringing them all into a coherent whole that's going to create value. That's not very easy. So lots of problems to be solved there. So learning and memory as foundation of identity and problem solving are very similar to cardio, if you are making that physical analogy. So the cardio training area would be the area that you would be working on your learning and memory in a way. The second one, it is emotion and perception. And I think emotion and perception as an analogy fit very well with core and balance. Emotion is not a problem as it is understood by some people who have given a huge emphasis on being analytical and problem solving. That is very true, of course, but emotion, remember, it is also the drive. It is also that fuel, it is that fire. So without that emotion, it is very difficult to get up and running. And perception is actually, in a way, your vision of the world. Like when you close your eyes, it is very easy to lose your balance. There's that game where you close your eyes and you try to walk on a straight line, which turns out to be impossible. So when we see the world, when we perceive the world, we actually get reference points, and that is at the core of our balance. So emotion and perception are akin to core and balance in a way. The third analogy, I think, which is very much in line with this, is with sleep. So the role of sleep is actually akin to the role of recovery and nutrition in physical sports, and because sleep is actually as the analogy used by Matthew Walker in his book Why We Sleep, which is a fantastic work, it is very similar to brushing your teeth. So during the day, the brain actually, through all that activity, leaves some residues that needs to be cleaned, and sleep is that. So good sleep has huge healing powers and incredible correlation between the health of the sleep you get, memory, recognition, learning, focus, and it lowers the risk factor for Alzheimer's, to heart disease, to blood pressure. So it is the recovery and nutrition bet in a way. The similarities don't end there. Like, if we had a gym for the mind, we would have the sleep area, emotion and perception area, learning and memory area. So these three areas. What else? I think we would have, in place of the strength training area, or as an analogy for strength training, we would have the imagination, problem solving, and critical thinking areas, because these areas are where, if you train, if you work on your problem solving, if you work on your critical thinking, if you work on your imagination and know how to manage that, and if you actually feed yourself with enough information and enough ideas and inspiration, this is actually very similar to becoming hugely strong in an argument, when you're facing a problem, when you have a task that is very complex. A tenured veteran founder who is very strong in this area, when compared to someone who is just at the very beginning of their entrepreneurial career, would actually have a very different attitude, both in the types of problems they are facing and how they are approaching to solving them. The analogy for endurance training, on the other hand, would be more around the area of resilience, uncertainty tolerance, and that keeping that motivation alive. So I think resilience, uncertainty tolerance, and motivation would be the analogy for endurance training. So, I mean, the gym for the mind would have an area of each of these, and it would essentially have games, as you've mentioned. So sports are games. That's actually that are ways for us to get that exercise that we need. But when it comes to mental health, when it comes to mental fitness, I don't think we are showing that effort as consciously as we can. And this comes back down to a certain theme, and that theme is through neuroscience, through what psychology has discovered so far, through cognition, behavior, and everything we are beginning to piece together about the human brain. It is just the beginning of this journey. Well, I've been looking into this field for the last 15 years, and even in this very short amount of time, what we have learned is truly astonishing. So the core idea, the core drive, the core motivation of this podcast is this. That is why I wanted to start with this idea. I would like to share what I think is valuable, what I think is useful, especially for entrepreneurs, but anyone really who is creating something, who is building something, who's looking for ways to optimize their productivity, their mental well-being, their mental fitness, mental health, and of course their happiness as a result of that. There are very strong ideas that I'm really excited to share with you. Let's take a look at some of those. Entrepreneurship is a true test of mental toughness, and we will look at the reasons why that is the case. What would a training program for the mind look like? We've established what a gym for the mind would look like, but what would a training program for the mind look like? How do we understand the mind better to optimize it for performance and well-being? Well, being an entrepreneur, is it like a marathon or is it a sprint? How do we refuel our minds? How do we do the rest and recovery? If we have a mental injury, trauma, or speaking as an analogy, if there's a certain situation which is quite difficult to digest, how do we overcome that? How do we buddy up? Role of partners in mental health and productivity is very important. How is the entrepreneur's brain different than someone who is not in that line of work? How do social ties actually protect our well-being? How do we appreciate the true role of chance? Like locus of control, it is an idea that we will get into more details of in the coming episodes. But if you think everything is in your control, then there's a cost to that as well. Other psychological concepts that are very handy to be aware of. So these are some of the ideas that I'm excited to share with you in the coming episodes. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe if you think this is for you. Take care.